Hello, I'm Sue Stockdale, and welcome to episode 68 of Access to Inspiration, the show where you can gain inspiration from people who may be unlike you. We hope their stories and insights enable you to transcend day-to-day challenges and reflect on what you are capable of achieving. This episode was recorded using Squadcast, the remote recording platform which empowers podcasters by capturing high-quality audio and video conversations that listeners love. We are proud that Squadcast are sponsors of this podcast series, and you will find them at squadcast.fm. My guest today is Caitríona Jennings, an endurance athlete who has represented Ireland in the Olympics in the marathon and holds the Irish national record at 50 kilometres and 100 kilometres. And one of the ways she gets motivated is a bit of friendly rivalry with her sister, who was a world champion rower. So welcome to the podcast, Caitríona. It's great to speak to you today.
Thanks, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I must say to the listener that as I'm speaking here to an Olympic athlete, I find it very amusing that she's sitting speaking to me from an office in Hong Kong and dressed in a business suit. So clearly you have a day job as well, Caitríona. Is that right?
I do, yeah. I pay the bills by, unfortunately, not good enough to run to pay my bills. So I have to work as well so that I can have a decent lifestyle.
So maybe just that's a good place to start then. Tell me about your job.
So I'm a VP Risk in CDB Aviation, which is an aircraft leasing company headquartered in Dublin, but we also have an office here in Hong Kong. Essentially what the business does is it acquires aircraft and leases them to airlines around the world. And my role is to assess the risk of the airline and the countries in which they operate so that we, I guess, can make an informed decision as to whether it's a good business opportunity for the company to lease the aircraft.
That sounds like a pretty full-on job, by the way you're describing it there, Caitríona. How do you manage to balance a job like that and running?
Yes, it is a full-on job. It requires a lot of time, and I wouldn't really call it a true 9-to-5 job because there's always various deadlines that must be met, and regardless of what you're doing, you have to achieve them and make sure that that's all running smoothly. But I typically do try to run early in the morning or early in the day if I can, because I find that once I have my exercise done, I'm more relaxed for the day. I don't mind working late, or I don't mind having to work through lunch if I know I've already kind of ticked my box of training, because it is more difficult as the day goes on and you might get pulled into something and then you find that you end up working late and getting grumpy because you're sacrificing more than your time. You're also sacrificing your training for the day. So I find that if I get it done early, it's best. But I also do try to prioritize the days in the week where I have a specific speed session to do or something that isn't just a matter of running at whatever time suits me, so that, again, I just can have that done before I start focusing on my day job.
And you say you get up early. How early is early?
Oh, it's not that early, maybe 6 a.m. But I know people that get up so much earlier and I have to drag myself out of bed every day at 6 a.m. So it could be a lot worse.
Now, you've had a really illustrious running career, Caitríona, and noticing on your achievements, you've held the Irish national record for every distance from 10K upwards over the years up to ultra running. That seems like you have a massive amount of achievements.
Well, no, I've never held anything below 50K. I've held 50K and 100K. So yes, I'm humbled to think that I currently hold the Irish record in both distances. I do find quite an achievement for myself and not something that I thought I would actually do. But now that I have them, I of course want to hold on to them for as long as I can and try and set a bit more challenging records for the next generation coming through that might find it a bit more difficult to make.
Tell me, how did you get into running in the first place?
So my family, they're all sports fanatics. My parents were very sporty and encouraged us to get involved in all sorts of sports, regardless of what it was. My mum brought us swimming 3 mornings a week at 6 a.m. and my dad brought us out cycling. But in addition to that, at the school that we were in, there were lots of sports available. So we played anything from badminton, basketball, volleyball, camogie. I mean, you name it, we played, like myself and both my sisters. And we loved it. We found it it was so much fun. And I suppose it was just the normal life. I didn't really know anything other than playing some sort of sport. But the older I get, the more grateful I am for that opportunity, because it led us into, both myself and my older sister Sinead ultimately ended up in the Olympics. But that, I suppose, that base or that grounding home life where we were always involved in sport gave us opportunities to kind of find the sport that we were both really interested in and to excel at it.
And what did Sinead then follow as well?
So Sinead rowed. She actually was the world champion in this lightweight single scull. And then herself and her partner, Claire Lamb, went to the Rio Olympics in 2016 in the double scull and finished 6th in the final. So at the time, it was the best result of an Irish female crew in the history of rowing. So it was an amazing achievement for them. And I like to think that kind of was a stepping stone onto the success of the female athletes in Tokyo in 2020, where we had the 4 girls in the quad win a bronze medal, which was the first medal for Ireland in rowing. So pretty great achievement for them.
So is it quite a competitive household then between you and your sisters?
Extremely competitive, yes. Not just at sport, at anything. When we were younger, any board game or game of cards or anything that was supposed to be fun was never fun. It was always quite competitive.
I can imagine your parents had a bit of difficulty keeping the peace.
Exactly, yeah, if they weren't involved.
So once you were doing these many different sports, why did you follow running as opposed to anything else that you were doing?
Well, initially I got involved in triathlon, which made sense at the time because, as I said, we did go swimming 3 mornings a week. I was quite a proficient swimmer and represented my club and county at provincial and national level. And then also from the cycling background and running, which I had also been doing it with the local club, Letterkenny Athletics Club, and my school, it almost made sense to combine 3 activities. And so I think I did my first triathlon at the age of about 12. Now, it wasn't the full Olympic distance, it was a short one, but I just absolutely loved it. And I think there's a really, really amazing community within the triathlon community where they really do encourage everyone to do their absolute best. And while it's competitive, it's also a really good network and support of the people involved. So I did that up to when I was in college and represented Ireland at an underage level in triathlon. But when I graduated from college and got my first job, I joined PwC, the accounting firm, and I was studying to become a chartered accountant at the same time. So that involved a full-time job plus attending college and studying and preparing for exams. So I guess I didn't have as much time as I used to have, and running was always my favorite anyway. Running was the one I couldn't wait to get off the bike so that I could start running, and I knew it was my strongest of the 3 disciplines. Running is also a very easy sport to do. You throw on your runners, you know yourself, so you throw on your runners and you're out the door and you're already training within a minute of starting. Whereas the others are a little bit more difficult. You have to travel to the pool, or you have to get organised for your bike and get all your gear so that you're not going to get a puncture or whatever. So running is just so simple and time efficient. And I ended up just sticking with that. I didn't start off break any records. I was kind of middle of the road club runner. And just the more I did it, the better I became at it and kind of progressed from there.
In a way, to be able to run effectively and have a job, you were focusing on one thing. And it kind of leads me into asking about, what do you think that your career and all the training you've done in the world of sport and athletics brings to your day job?
So I think it has instilled a really strong sense of discipline into me and my timekeeping and how I structure my day and how I ensure that I'm not wasting time or that I essentially get the most out of the time that I have. But I think the most important learning that I got from running was how to be resilient. I know it's a word that's thrown around quite a bit these days, but when you're performing at a high level, people read about the glory days, but there are a lot of difficult times, setbacks, injuries, disappointments, sicknesses, or just things that happen at the wrong time and that they affect your performance and that you don't achieve what you had intended or run, in my case, how you'd liked. And I think it's a really great way to know, but you have to always just pick yourself back up and go for the next one all the time and just continually do that, no matter how many times you're set back. And applying that in a workplace, it is also very helpful because in normal times, you might be going for a promotion or whatever. You don't necessarily get it and you're disappointed, but hard work and setting clear goals for yourself, you'll ultimately get there. But I think even more so at the moment in COVID times with the various restrictions and the number of times that we think we're coming to the end of it and we're stepped back again, and having to constantly accept and adapt is something that I've done all my life in sport. So I can transfer it quite easily to work and to life. And there's always a positive to everything. And you try to just constantly focus on that positive. And on a lighter note, I guess it's a great stress relief. It's a great way to shake off the worries of the world by throwing on runners and getting out into the countryside and enjoying that.
Well, they do say that movement is medicine. And I think that's quite a true saying, isn't it?
For sure.
Now, I'm just looking at your career highlights here, Caitríona, and for the listener to know that you're, as you said, current Irish record holder at 100 kilometres, and the time is what I'm particularly amazed by, 7 hours, 43 minutes. I want to know, how do you keep concentrating in a race for 7 hours and 43 minutes?
Well, that was challenging, I won't lie. I remember starting off it was my first 100K. So I started off in the morning. I think the race started at 9 a.m. And all I thought was, I'm going to be running for as long as I spend a day in work in the office, and think of all the things I do during that time. And all I'm going to do today is just run. So I kind of tried to not think about it as much as I could, or I was setting myself like small time goals so that I would only focus on a short chunk of it at the time. So I was breaking it down into maybe hours or 90-minute segments so that I didn't get overwhelmed by the thought of, I knew I was probably going to run somewhere between 7 hours and 8 hours. So just starting with that seems like a huge task, but I was just breaking it down and making it a little bit more, I suppose, less daunting for myself.
And how do you stop that self-doubt, that little voice that might sneak into one's head that's, well, it does into my head sometimes, and think, oh, this is too hard, or will I do it? Oh, these other people look good. All those things that sometimes can threaten to throw us off keeping focused.
I have those moments of doubt all the time, the little voice in my head, but I just constantly try and reinforce positivity. And I just keep telling myself, well, it's easy now, it's comfortable now, don't worry about it, stay in the moment, don't worry about what it will feel like. If it does, if the wheels fall off, you can deal with it then. And I knew the pace I was running at was a very manageable pace for me. I felt very comfortable. I didn't feel like I was overstretching. Sometimes it's difficult because I was conscious that I really wanted to win the race, and I was very aware of everyone that I was running with. And I was kind of starting to think, oh, I wonder, are they more comfortable than I am? You have this like impatience, you want to burn them off, quickly so that you can that assurance that you're going to be at the front. But actually, what I've learned in the past is, if you try and burn someone off too fast, you're actually only destroying your own race. So you just have to be incredibly patient. And I just keep repeating the mantra, patience, patience, and let it just go from there.
It sounds like it's that competitive spirit within you that's dying to get out in that race at that moment when you want to get in front of the others early on, and how you hold yourself back.
You really have to taper your competitive instincts in 100K.
Now, to get to a race, it requires obviously an incredible amount of training, not to mention nutrition and recovery, I imagine, are really important facets of what enable you to be there and perform on the day. How do you pay attention to those things? What do you do in terms of healthy eating and recovering?
It's actually an area that I've tried to focus on a lot more recently, because in the past, I do have a busy lifestyle, as you know. So I would tend to just try and get the session done and get on to the next thing without really thinking too much about nutrition. And I did realize that it was probably contributing to some of the injuries I was picking up, or, just feeling tired or failing to recover fast enough for my next session. At the start of 2021, actually formed a new partnership with Tailwind Nutrition, and I found their products really good. It's a very simple formula. They have two products. They have one for fueling when you're running and one for recovery. So for me, it was quite simple and it wasn't overwhelming when I didn't use it in the past. And I liked the ingredients that they use. They're all very natural. They don't have high sugar quality. So I know that even if I'm in a rush and I need to get something into me after I've done a hard session, before I, sit at my desk for the day, I can take a recovery drink, and that's been really helpful. But I also do focus on real food as well. So even if it's just something small like a snack in that 30-minute window, I'll always have something with me now. Whereas before I may have just, as I said, been too busy to kind of even prepare for it. Now I know that the 5 minutes it takes to prepare your recovery snack is just as important as the run itself. I'll always have a banana or an apple or something that I can eat straight away. And then aside from that, I just try and eat healthily. I try and focus on real foods rather than things that come in packets or jars. And a bit like everything that we learn or that people are promoting now, I think it's really interesting the amount of research that's been done, and evidence is overwhelming to show the connection between gut health and mental health. And that was a real eye-opener for me as well. And it probably helped me to make better choices when it comes to the type of food that I eat.
If you're enjoying this episode, you might want to listen to other episodes from people involved in endurance running. In episode 29, I spoke to Barry Fudge, former head of endurance at British Athletics, who worked closely with Mo Farah. And in episode 27, Nontu Mugabe explained what it took her to run 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. Go on over to accesstoinspiration.org and you can listen there or read all the transcriptions. Now back to this episode. We had previously a guest on our podcast who was formerly the head of endurance for the British athletics team. And one of the things that he had talked about was the growth of technology in sport and how that is really influencing things. And I'm wondering, how do you utilize technology to help you train or to help you compete effectively in a race?
So I'm still probably a novice when it comes to technology, and I know a lot of the benefits that it can provide, and you can get lots of gadgets that help various different measurements. But I am a novice, but I'm also quite a fundamentalist in that I focus on heart. For me, heart rate shows me so much. An elevated heart rate in the morning tells me I'm stressed or I'm sick and I need to watch the training I do that day. And training within my zones, I know if I train within my zones that I'm not going to overtrain or undertrain. So I know I'll be hitting exactly what I want to achieve during that session. For me, it's as simple as a watch and a heart rate monitor, and that's kind of the extent of my technology. Now, I do get my VO2 max and lactate levels tested so that I know that I'm training within the correct zones. I think there's probably a lot of technology that is out there that I'm not necessarily tapping into at the moment. I will maybe let others tell me which is the most beneficial and, and go from there.
I'm also thinking about clothing and shoes. Do they play a role in how you sort of prepare for a race?
Shoes, amazing. Yeah. I mean, gosh, the amount of advancement in shoes since I started running is just mind boggling, and particularly more so in the last couple of years. But now I race in carbon plated shoes, which is definitely beneficial. And I think you'd struggle to find anyone that disagrees with that statement. But I am sponsored by Hoka One One, and they have two amazing carbon plated shoes, the Rocket X, which is the kind of marathon shoe, or the Carbon X2, which would be more the longer distance shoe that I would have run the 100-kilometer race in. And it's amazing that we have that technology now that we can race in. We're very fortunate, but I think they're great. Obviously, for obvious reasons, the carbon fiber is so light, and that does help a lot when you're monitoring all the various grams of the shoes you wear. But I think the carbon fiber plate also helps stabilize the ankle, which puts less stress on the calves. And a lot of the injuries that I had, like maybe 5-10 years ago now, were all relating to my calves and my ankles and my feet. So I think that the fact that I can race now in the Rocket X or the Carbon X2, I know that I recover faster from the race and I don't pick up as many niggles from the hard sessions. I would also wear those shoes during my interval sessions as well. And I think that does help me to recover faster.
So looking at those points that some have described as the marginal gains, the small things that one pays attention to in order to improve. And thinking about your training sessions, do you have a coach that you work with, Caitríona, or are you developing and designing your own training program?
I do. I just recently started working with the coach, Nick Bester, in South Africa. So he does coach me remotely, but it's amazing. It's very beneficial because up until recently, I was in a phase where I was kind of self-coaching, and I find that quite difficult because you're not accountable to anyone. So you tend to, maybe on days where you don't feel like doing a very tough session, decide, oh, maybe I'll change it that morning. And realistically, you shouldn't be doing that. And also you have a tendency to overtrain. I know that the two are actually, they kind of conflict with each other, but I would have a tendency to just run too many miles, like miles equals speed, but actually they don't always, depends on the type of miles you're doing. And I think having a coach is really beneficial for that reason as well, because they'll make sure you're focused on the correct mileage as opposed to just mileage, and also then hold you back if you're tempted to push on or tempted to train harder than you should be doing based on how you're performing at the time.
So having that accountability sounds like it's quite helpful to you.
For sure. Yeah.
So in your career to date, Caitríona, what's been the highlight for you?
So the highlight for me has to be the race that I ran, the marathon in Rotterdam, where I achieved the Olympic qualifying standard for the marathon. And I was selected then to represent Ireland in the London Olympic Games as a result. Yeah, that was probably one of the most perfectly executed races that I've run. And you can't beat the feeling of actually stepping on the line and executing it perfectly and stepping away of having achieved what you'd hoped for. But I would say a very close second was running Comrades Ultramarathon in 2019, where I finished third. And for me, I had a very disappointing experience in the Olympics, but I think finishing third in Comrades was my day of retribution, where I realised that, yeah, I am still a decent runner and I can still perform and podium in a major event. So yeah, that was really good.
You're eloquently describing to us some of those highs and lows of one's running career, and it's not always plain sailing.
No, and to say that there were 7 years between the two races just shows you the number of lows that you can have and how long it can go on.
So what does the future hold for you, Caitríona? How do you keep yourself motivated into the future?
More recently started focusing a bit on the ultra distance, as we've just discussed. I ran the 100k during the summer, and I've run a few 50ks and the 90k race in Comrades. I think that's a kind of a new focus for me. It's a new interest. I find it exciting to see where I can go. As I said, I am motivated to reduce the records for both the 50k and the 100k. And I think that motivation is just what's keeping me going. And also just knowing that I think the human body is fascinating. And I think if you really set your mind on something and you have a goal and you do everything it takes that's necessary to achieve it, I actually find it really interesting to see it come to fruition. And look, at the end of the day, I love running. I don't think I could really live without it. And I think my husband would agree with that. So he's happy as long as I'm out running and getting those endorphins and staying mentally and physically happy and healthy. So yeah, that's my motivation. It's difficult at the moment. I'm based here in Hong Kong. We have very restrictive quarantine rules for traveling. So when you return, you have to spend 3 weeks in a hotel, which is definitely challenging and has been throughout the last year. But I'm eyeing up a couple of races this year, which I'm hoping I can get to. There's a race in South Africa, 50k in March. That's the Nedbank Runified race. And also then there's the Lakes Sonoma race in California in April. So I'm hoping to make either or both of those. And at the moment, that's what's encouraging me to put my runners on and getting out there and running.
And do you get on the phone to your sister and tell her what you're up to so that you can have a bit of competition from her too?
Oh, my sister has a new theory that we're too old to train hard. She's 4 years older than me, and she's one of these people that doesn't necessarily have to train, but she can go out and perform amazingly. She's living in Australia at the moment, and she did the Sunshine Coast half Ironman and finished 10th among all the pros. And I said to her, gosh, I didn't think you were training that hard. And she said, oh, I wasn't. It's wasted on that's for young people. We don't need to train hard anymore.
So you just hope she doesn't take up the ultra running like you do.
Oh, we have had a few running races head to head over the years, which have never been pleasant for me because I've always felt the pressure of having to win when I'm the runner. I've kept her at bay so far, so let's see what she gets interested in from now on.
And if there was a listener that was hearing you speak, Caitríona, and thinking about starting running, who'd never done it before, what would your advice to them be?
I'd say amazing, embrace it. Just make sure not to put too much pressure on yourself. Try and enjoy it as much as you can. Take it at your own pace and don't feel like you have to sprint. I think a lot of people that are starting running think they have to run fast all the time. Running slow is equally as enjoyable and beneficial as running fast, especially at the start. And I would say if you can, find a group of people that are around your pace that you can meet up with and join in with and just have a few chats over the miles. It will make it easier. Or if you're in a more isolated area where you can't find a group, even if you had one person that you meet, as I said, being accountable to someone is actually huge, especially when, it's cold and dark in the mornings and you don't necessarily want to get up at 6 or even earlier. If you're meeting someone, you will get up. It's easier to let yourself down than to let someone else down.
Well, those are wise words from you, Caitríona. It's been fantastic speaking to you today. I've loved what you've had to say about running. As a runner myself in the past and still going out occasionally, I know what joy it brings and the simplicity of doing it. As you said, just get on those training shoes and the clothes and go out there with nothing much else, no more equipment required.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's been a pleasure, Sue. And let's hope that we can both continue to run for many years to come.
Absolutely. Now, if anybody that's listening wants to find out more about you, Caitríona, and what you've done, how might they do that on the internet?
So you can check me out at my website, CaitríonaJennings.com. Caitríona is spelled Caitriona, Jennings.com. And I'm on Instagram, Jennings Caitríona, and Twitter, CJennings1x.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put links to all of those things on the show notes to accompany this podcast. Again, thank you for your time today, Caitríona, and enjoy your run tomorrow or whenever the next one is that you're going to be doing.
Will do. Thanks, Sue.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Caitríona Jennings. And maybe you now feel inspired to put on your training shoes and go out for a run. Remember, you can help us to spread awareness about this podcast with other people. So have a think. Who do you know that needs a bit of inspiration today? Go on, send them the link to this episode, or write us a review on Apple Podcasts so that others can know the value you've gained from it. Next week, I will be talking to Sanzar Kakar, Chairman of Afghanistan Holding Group, operating a number of different businesses in Afghanistan. I hope you will join me then.